Welcome to a platform where we debate on the top stories of the NBA, NFL, Major League Baseball, and other leagues with the best in the world of sports. You'll also get interviews with many athletes and media talents at several basketball events, including the WNBA and college basketball. My name is Rafiq Ulwazon, and this is Nothing But That Sports Talk. Yeah, not a good way for Fordham to go out on UMass as I welcome to this episode of Nothing But That Sports Talk. I'm Rafiq Ulwazon, alongside the guy who's been following 1910 almost all season and the past few seasons ever since I came back to Fordham to cover their game against I believe it was George Washington, whatever the case may be. Samuel Basel. Welcome aboard, sir.
Thank you for having me, Rafiq. It's great to be here.
Yeah, it's a long time coming for you to come on Nothing But That Sports Talk since I met you during my grad year. I believe it was like your second or third year at the time, working the front desk at WV. And I remember you mentioned that you got to cover hockey and a few other sports during your time at WV. Why don't you give us a little bit about like your backstory about why you got interested in sports journalism, let alone Fordham University?
Yeah. I've been passionate about sports ever since I was, a kid. I think, I really, ignited my passion for sports watching some of the Knicks in the early 2010s, right? Back when I was in high school. And then my sophomore year at Fordham, I joined WFUV. I learned about, the opportunities that it provided, the alumni that came out of the sports department. And I just thought, that felt like something I could do, something I wanted to do. So I hopped in. I joined the sports department. Um, I learned a lot, had a great time. Under Bobby Shaffordini, the sports director at the time, and who is still sports director as well as Bob Aarons. Um, but yeah, a lot of great opportunities at WFUV, beat reporting, being on air at one-on-one, and I feel like it's definitely translated to, the stuff that I work on today with A10 Talk and House of College Hoops and hopping on Nothing But That Sports Talk.
Yeah, I can tell you've done a lot of interesting stuff. And when I see you came out covering games, I'm like, oh yeah, I remember this guy, Sam Basel. Let me see, back to covering before the games like you did during this time going there as a student. But why don't you talk a little bit about like when you first when you went through like all the workshops, like what was the one main thing that you learned the most and the least?
Oh, one thing I learned the most is uh well, I'll say two things. Two things I learned the most is you can't get anywhere without prep, right? You can't just wing a lot of stuff in sports journalism. You have to be knowledgeable about what you're talking about. And people can kind of see right through that, right? When you're not. Um Additionally, I think it's a big part about, being in sports media, making a name for yourself is just being present and, just being a good person, right? I mean, some of the biggest opportunities that I've had at WFUV, outside of FUV, on the websites I work on now, going to the events I cover now, like the Atlantic 10 tournament, which I'll be at next week, and I hope to see you there as well.
We will see
Um,
you there too.
Excellent, excellent. Well, hopefully we'll do something, live. But again, like that's exactly what I'm saying. It's seeing a lot of the same faces, right? It's getting your foot in the door. It's speaking to people. It's introducing yourself. And people will remember that. And if you leave a good impact on people, I think that's really important. There are a lot of people who have left a really good impact on me. That I reach out to and I ask to come on my stuff all the time. And then there are people who hopefully I feel like I've built a relationship with that when, they need someone to talk about Fordham hoops or they need someone to talk about A10 basketball, they can call me up. So that's kind of the biggest thing. It's just, you know, be cool, make friends, and, just don't get too wrapped up in it. Just kind of, you know, learn your stuff and let it ride a little bit.
Oh, okay. What year you joined WUV? Because
What did I enjoy at FUV?
what year you joined?
Oh, what year did I join? I joined FUV, so my sophomore year of college. So that was the
Like
27-18 school year. And then I
27,
graduated 2020.
17, 18 school year. So you
Correct.
was pretty much on your second. It was only like your third year of college, second year at UV when I came in doing that 1 year grad program, and I've actually literally did the same workshops with people like Kayla Wenzel and Gigi Spear, who funny enough, she's now a women in sports host, doing intermediate hosting. I mean, seeing her growth, you got to see her growth at WV during your final 3 years there, and actually like when she's in the middle of her 4 years at Fordham University. But when you're working with people like that, when she came into doing one-on-one assignments with you, like, why don't you talk about the chemistry you guys had?
Yeah, Gigi's great. Like you said, she's also, a product of FUV Sports, Fordham University. She was on the softball team. And, one of the great things about, being still in the New York area and coming out of FUV Sports is, you know, I'm still at Fordham games. I'm sitting there at press row covering them for A10 Talk and House of College Hoops. And then she is in arena hosting all the Fordham basketball games. So, and then, you go around, on the call for, Fordham basketball for ESPN Plus and SNY is Andrew Posadas, Andrew Bogish. So, people like to stick around Fordham because it's a place that can provide you those great opportunities. And it's just a great place to be. I mean, we get to watch some Fordham basketball. We get to cover it, have that real on the ground experience, as students and as alumni. So yeah, Gigi's fantastic. And everybody that comes out of FUV Sports is, doing great things, whether they're at the school or somewhere else, right? Someone else I can give a shout out to, Emmanuel Barbari, right? He's been doing great stuff at Siena. He's doing stuff with the Yankees radio. So yeah, just a lot of opportunities, and it's one of those things where it's pretty hard when you're sticking in the New York area to not run into a former FUV person or just a former Fordham person in general, which is great.
I get that same feeling when I was doing WGV news reporting during my time working with George Podarki, who was news director at the time. Now he's not anymore, and then after that was Robin, and now I don't know who's the news director right now, but that's a subject later. But being able to connect with these people and getting to share my experiences at LIU Brooklyn prior to Fordham, and knowing that working the audio board for Fordham is way different than the audio board I ran when I was at LIU Brooklyn. It's just something you had to embrace.
Absolutely, yeah.
And to continue in the further conversation as we talk about Fordham, when I came back to cover them, they were actually pretty good. They were a top 14 in Atlantic 10. Right now, they kind of tumbled a little bit after losing Khalid Moore and in Queensberry. They're sub 500. They barely lost against UMass earlier this week, and well, they do have one more home game before they start their Atlantic 10 tournament run at the Barclays Center, which you will be at. We'll definitely be able to talk to the players. But when you observe like the regression of Fordham from last year to this year, like what do you think was the cause behind it? Was it more about new players coming in, taking the place of older players, or just not so great offense that you're witnessing in the front row?
Yeah, so it feels a bit more of like a transition, more so than a full-on regression, right? I mean, naturally, you look at the record, they've clinched, a worse record than last year, right? They finished 12-6 in Atlantic 10 play to clinch a top 4 spot at the end of the 2023 season. This year, right now, heading into the final game of the regular season, they're 6-11 in Atlantic 10 play. Like you said, they lost Khalid Moore and Darius Quisenberry to graduation. So there was a lot of moving parts with this team. I think right now the main focus has been just continuing to develop that sophomore class that Keith Ergo has continued to cultivate, right? The Will Richardsons, Elijah Grays, Ramad Deans of the team. And then also, making sure that the leadership that is still there, that it's actually going to be, celebrated at senior day this week, like Kyle Rose and Antrell Charlton, making sure that the impact that they leave is, focused on, continuing this tradition of Fordham basketball that Kyle Rose has been a part of for such a long time, right? This season, he set the record for most games played for, Fordham men's basketball. And just ensuring that, this team, even if they're taking a little bit of a step back this year, they're set up for success in the future.
That's a fact. And Coach Ergo is doing a major job, trying to like trying to somehow keep this culture together. I mean, it's not really a winning culture compared to last year, but at the very least, he gave me a reminder of the type of team they were when I watched them barely get past North Texas on the game winner dunk by Abdul Sabila. And you heard what I asked for the press conference where I was asking about like, what does it do for your confidence as a player? And like from that point on, do you feel that he is gaining a lot more confidence, even with all the losing and the whole 2 month drought to not win a home game?
Yeah, that stretch was tough. It was definitely tough for the team. I mean, like a lot of coaches will say, you can't really focus on, winning games at home more than winning games on the road or vice versa. But at the same time, I can't say for sure. But that does take a toll. And I think with a player like Abdou Simbila, I think he had a little bit of a moment, midway through conference play that he kind of was fouling a lot. He was getting into foul trouble, every once in a while. But now he's kind of become a little bit more of a presence off the bench in some games, depending on certain lineups that Coach Ergo is working with. I know Ramad Dean's gotten some starts, Elijah Gray's gotten some starts. So it's all about, just making sure. And I've asked Coach Ergo about, the philosophy behind a lot of these lineups, right? Um, and it's not really about, oh, a guy's doing better, let's put him in the lineup. A guy is, he's slumping or he's not really fit for this matchup, let's come off the bench. It's not really about that. It's more of just, what Coach Ergo calls playing for the front of the jersey, right? And I think Abdu, like anybody, he's been on this team. This is his third year with the Rams, right? I think he knows that more than as much as any other guy on this team. And in these games that he's come off the bench, he's done a solid job, right? He's had in 3 of his last 4 games, he's had at least 10 points. He has not really gotten in that much foul trouble. He's had 3 personal fouls. Um, so I think it's again like so many things with this team. It's all about adjustment. It's all about figuring out how to play the best you can and also play with this unique style of basketball that I think Fordham has been trying to cultivate for these past 2 years. And I would say past 3 years, starting with Coach Neptune.
That's a very interesting point. And when I witnessed them, like I feel like they struggle. They always get off to these bad starts. And they struggle to have any kind of competitive intensity. I mean, you witnessed that in the loss against Dayton, which is the only ranked team in the conference, by the way. And then you kind of saw that in most of the home losses where they fall behind too early. They have a tough time coming back. They struggle to hit threes at times. They struggle to like defend the interior at times. So it all boils down to like overcoming the struggles when it really matters the most, when the opportunity to win games is right in your face.
Yeah, I mean it's tough. It's tough when the way that Fordham wants to play basketball is it's tough when a team like Dayton is coming up against Fordham, right? Because like I've said, one thing that is kind of a story for this Fordham team this year is the turnover, right? They're trying to figure things out. They're trying to figure out who's going to be that guy to have the ball in his hands, and at the end of the game, who is going to kind of take charge both on the court, in the locker room, right? And I think at this point in the season, they figured that out, right? There are some leaders on this, strong leaders on this team, but you look at a team like Dayton, and a lot of other teams in the Atlantic 10, they've had that figured out. They figured that out in the summer, right? It was going to be Deron Holmes, and then on the bench, you've got guys like Kobe Brea. So it's one of those things where I think a really important quote, throughout this season that I've thought about a lot is something that Coach Mark Schmidt of, excuse, yes, that Coach Mark Schmidt of St. Bonaventure said at Atlantic 10 Media Day, in that one of the most important things, the most important things to have, as far as a trait for a team in this conference is experience. Obviously, Coach Mark Schmidt is a guy that, these past 2 seasons, I would say 2 years ago, and then it changed recently. He liked to play his seniors. He liked to play, his Oshuna Shuni's, his Kyle Loftons, right? And then last year when he was kind of put in a position where he had to start a lot of young guys that were a bit more inexperienced, the team kind of took a step back. And so I think Fordham is a team that's still building that right now. They have the experience. They have experiences in a lot of ways, but I think the class that they're really trying to develop right now still has a bit of a way to go. And once they're, juniors, seniors, I think we're really going to see, it's going to be the real telltale sign of what this team is really about.
Yeah, and it all boils down to like the play of Kyle Rose and on Trail. These guys have to step up the score, and I mean, Kyle Rose is averaging about 10 points per game. So their scoring is not up to par. It all comes down to like who's going to get you a high scoring night, not every single game.
Yeah, yeah, you bring up a great point. Kyle Rose this season, I have to say, has been excellent. Obviously, like I've said before, he's no player in Fordham men's basketball history has played in as many games for the Fordham Rams as Kyle Rose. He broke that record this year. Another thing that he's broken, he's hit his career high in scoring 3 times this year. His last, his highest of his career was against St. Joe's in a loss where he had 31 points. But again, just a really impressive performance. He's really, stepped up in his final year. I mean, he was great last year as well. There was an article I did for A10 Talk last season where, I talked about Kyle Rose, especially with his impact defensively, which is something that Coach Ergo has really wanted the team to be built around for a long time. Defensively, if you look at his defensive box plus minus per game, and I know that's a bit more of a, that's not a stat that is completely indicative of what an individual player can do. There's a lot of team factors that are involved in that. But I think if you go and look at those stats, his defensive box plus minus was comparable to the overall box plus minus of every other player on that team. So I think when you look at when this team starts, defense first, Kyle Rose is emblematic of that. And for him to also be able to, combine it this year with really strong scoring performances, 4 games this season in which he's had at least 20 points. It's been really impressive to watch.
That's a interesting point. And I remember when you were there when I spoke to Coach last year, when they won the final game of the season, it all boiled down to getting the stops. And Kyle Rose does lead the team in steals, and being able to steal for the other team does lead to like getting the stops that Fordham needs in order to actually carry to a better offensive efforts.
Yeah, absolutely. You speak about getting stops. I mean, that's still a focus this year. I think it will always be a focus for any Keith Ergo-led Fordham team, right? I mean, you ask him all the time, it's something that he really hammers into you, right? In press conferences and interviews, this team is built around their defensive identity. Look at a game this year, right? Against George Mason at home. At halftime, the score was 19-18 in favor of George Mason. Fordham ended up winning that game 61-60. Again, a tough performance from the field for both the Rams and the Patriots at that time, but it never felt like Fordham never felt like it was a game that they were out of. It never felt like, oh my God, we are not hitting our shots, we're not getting to our spots, we're hopeless in this game. The focus was, we've got them within a point, we've held them to a pretty poor performance from the field. We have the opportunity, if we can string together stops and then respond with baskets on the other end, we can pull out this win. So I think that is kind of how Fordham would like to see themselves win games, this season and onwards, right?
Yep, that's a very interesting point. And as we get to like transition to the Atlantic 10 tournament, like how high are the Fordham Rams' chances of at the very least winning the first A10 tournament game? I know you got the game against the Rhode Island Rams coming up, but what do you expect? How can Fordham use this game to prepare for the upcoming Atlantic 10 tournaments, regardless of even if they end up drawing them in the first round?
Yeah, so for anybody, in March Madness, I wouldn't say we're in March Madness yet. I mean, some people say we are, but we're not in the official NCAA tournament, right? But at this point, right, every game feels like a playoff game. Every game feels like a tournament game. And you ask a lot of people about, difference makers in college basketball. And for me, one of the most important things for a team at any point during March, whether it's their conference tournament at the end of the regular season or they finally make it to the big one, right? It's really about momentum. Fordham is in a really interesting position with this game. They are in a position to possibly avoid the first day of the tournament, the proverbial what they call the pillow fight,
Yeah,
right?
kind of like a few. Yeah, that's kind of unlikely because they're like a few games out.
Well, yes, so they're in a possible position to sorry, can we just hold on 1 second?
Yeah, they're 2 games out because let's not forget the Atlantic 10 tournament. If you're in the top 8, you're at least guaranteed to bye in the first round. But if you're in the top 4, you get a double bye in the first 2 rounds when you don't have to play to the quarterfinals. So in the season where Fordham would probably play the first round no matter what because remember they're 2 games out of the 8th spot after losing to UMass. So ESPN.com website. I'm literally looking at it right now.
Yeah. You're right. So depending on how this game goes, if they win a game, if they beat Rhode Island and LaSalle can also lose this weekend in their final game, they have a chance to avoid that last spot, right? Or no, excuse me, you're right. Yes. So they are going to be playing on the first day. But again, what's really important is this game ahead, right? This game against Rhode Island. I've asked, it's one of those things where a lot of teams they don't really like to focus on, you know, thinking too far out, thinking about potential tournament matchups when you've got a game on Saturday. So I think the first focus is, senior day, the final home game of the season, celebrating the seniors and getting a final win, right? And possibly carrying that momentum into the first day of the Atlantic 10 tournament. In terms of matchups, I think a lot of these teams, it'll be tough for Fordham. I mean, they lost 2 games to Davidson this year. They did beat St. Louis at St. Louis for the first time in the program's history. Playing St. Louis, they beat George Washington on the.
They did beat the Rams in Rhode Island. In Rhode Island back, it was a very tough physical game. I remember that was when Rose put up like 24 points.
Yeah, they did beat Rhode Island at Rhode Island, and they have an opportunity to beat Rhode Island again. So I think it's really a little bit far out to say what their focus is in terms of the matchups. But again, the focus is mainly just winning this weekend.
Yeah, that's the mindset. That's literally the mindset that you have to think of. And when I spoke to some of the players that were there last year, all they care about is winning the games right in front of them, not a possible berth to March Madness. I mean, but you know what's as unpredictable as college basketball is, you never know what type of Fordham Rams team you're going to get as you go to the Atlantic. We're going to continue having these conversations as you go into the Atlantic 10, as you go into Atlantic 10 tournament play. But back to the point, like we spoke to Coach Ergo about the Fordham Rams victory against the Rhode Island Rams. Rams, like, what do you tell you as far as the type of system that the Rhode Island Rams play?
Yeah, I mean, Rhode Island plays they play a really tough system. I mean, Archie Miller has been a coach, at Rhode Island. This is his second season at Rhode Island, but obviously, a lot of longtime A10 fans will know that he was at Dayton. He was at Dayton, took the Indiana job, and now is back in the Atlantic 10 with Rhode Island. So he's a coach that knows, how this league works. He knows how a lot of these teams play. So it's gonna be a tough matchup. I think, obviously, they've had their struggles as well. They're coming into this right now losing 7 in a row. So I think, Fordham has, they have a little bit of momentum. They won their last 2 home games in a row. So it's going to be an interesting matchup for sure.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting. It's going to see what happens as they look to end and into 10 regular season play strong.
Absolutely. And like you said, right, talking about seeding, it's a little too far out. Once we get into the tournament, right, once the final bracket is set, probably at some point Saturday evening, I feel like a lot of coaches have this mentality. While on paper, a team that's playing on Tuesday is at a potential disadvantage seating wise than a team who's just joining the bracket on Thursday, right? Who gets the double bye. If you're thinking about that, if you're a team, a coach or a player that's putting yourself in that mentality where, look, we kind of got to dig ourselves out of a hole here, you're probably not going to dig yourselves out, right? And I think that's something that Coach Ergo really tries to emphasize with his players, and I feel like it's something that his guys try to to emphasize with themselves, right? Once you get to that tournament, it's everybody's 0-0. There's a lot of outside influence, there's a lot of outside speculation on what's going to happen, but at the end of the day, you just got to keep playing basketball, win or go home for the next month, right?
Yeah, that's a lot of interesting stories and narrative that you really like produce when you're covering these teams. Which leads to one question. I mean, like, why don't you talk about your overall experience of working A10 Talk and be able to cover not just your alma mater, but the rest of the conference?
Yeah, so A10 Talk is a fantastic site, right? I like to say, I'm the host of the A10 Talk podcast. I've been hosting it for I think 3 seasons now. This is my 4th season with A10 Talk, but my 3rd hosting our flagship podcast. Um, and one thing I always like to finish off the podcast with is saying, it's just impeccable coverage for your favorite 15 teams in college basketball, because that's really what it's about, right? Everybody at A10 Talk is not there for, a ton of credit, or they're not there to, we're not there to make money, covering basketball. We're there because we're all fans of these schools. We like watching A10 basketball. I do my podcast with Kaylee Godek, who is a UMass fan, frequent contributor, also Daniel Frank, a GW and George Mason fan. So these podcasts and these blogs that we put out as a site and as a social media page and organization, right? They all come out of just our love for our schools and our love for the game. And I think that's, the number one thing that helps us, put out this content. So yeah, A10 Talk, I think, has been fantastic for me, and it's been fantastic to contribute, with them so far. And
Yeah,
I would also like to, spotlight the other website that I am a contributor for, which is the House of College Hoops. House-enterprise.com, which I, was started by, a couple guys I know from home on Long Island. And again, at the same time, we're not doing it for the cash. We're not doing it for, just, increasing our Twitter followers. We're doing it because we love basketball. We love, everything that we cover on those websites. And when you go to these tournaments and you go to these events, that's what you discover, right? Everybody is there because they're a super fan, and getting to do this for work is just, an added bonus, right? For, essentially living the dream, right?
exactly. And you know what? I'm living the dream just by even coming back into the college basketball landscape and seeing and being able to re-enter it and cover it for this platform, nothing but that sports talk. I kind of get a taste of how much I enjoyed covering Atlantic 10, like literally sitting for the whole tournament. But this year, I'm only gonna be doing like the first 2 rounds and the championship game because I'm gonna be going back. I'm gonna be like going back and forth from that to the Big East tournament at the Garden this year.
Nice, nice.
I'll be doing the quarterfinals. After new quarterfinals, most likely UConn, whoever they face, and a possible St. John's versus Seton Hall matchup, and of course the semifinals and championship game. And I know, well, you probably might not be able to squeeze the Big East tournament because you got the A10 stuff to worry about. But if you ever had a chance to watch any Big East tournament games, you'd be amazed by what you're about to see at the Garden. Especially since you got to see Fordham play against St. John's at the Garden earlier this year, and well, they didn't really play too well. But it adds on to what we were talking about when it comes to this Fordham Rams team this year, after in the middle of a regression from last season. So like they've had a tough time going up against St. John's.
Yeah. And again, I think it's one of those things where, St. John's is just in a different stage of development as a program. Obviously, St. John's is in the Big East, which, I think, they draw a lot more eyes. There's a lot more, at the moment, there's a bit more money right now coming into the program. I mean, you have Rick Pitino heading the Red Storm, right? You have Rick Pitino, who's been coaching college basketball longer than both of us have been alive. And then, so there's a lot of different reasons for why, St. John's was, favored to win that matchup for Fordham and why they came out on top, right? But like what you said, that's what it's about, right? That's why we're doing this, right? Because at the A10 tournament, at the Big East tournament, we're chasing those moments. We're getting to experience them firsthand and hopefully relay them the best we can for other people who might not be able to be there, whether that be through a podcast or through an article or maybe just through our Twitter updates, right? A couple great moments that I have been lucky to see in person, both at the A10 and at the A10 tournament and even at some St. John's games as well. I mean, I think in the 2022 tournament, watching Richmond kind of come up and get that momentum, like what I was saying, it's all about momentum, right? They came up, they weren't really a favorite to win the A10 tournament that year in DC, but they had a great weekend, and because they were so close, they were so close to their own school compared to being in Brooklyn, like the tournament is in a lot of years. As they made their run. They got to the semifinals. There were more Richmond fans coming down to DC, culminating in a great final game against Davidson, where they pretty much blew the roof off the arena. Right. Then they flipped it into a win against Iowa in that same NCAA tournament that year. And then moving back into the Barclays Center, where Fordham, obviously clinching their double bye, a historic season for the Rams. That first game in the quarterfinals against LaSalle.
That was a
Um,
crazy finish.
yeah, exactly right.
That was
The
crazy.
lower bowl of the Barclays Center felt like you had taken Rose Hill Gym and quadrupled it in size, right?
Exactly. You see all
Um,
those fans, you see all those Fordham fans, and everybody was there. Even Tony Reality from around the horn, he was there. Bobby C was there, of course, and yeah, introduced some of the kids. He gave me support because he saw me and you in the same interview with these players and saying, "Yo, I mean, I saw your interview. You were saying you were interviewing those players. Good stuff." I was like, "Hey, had to come back and give it to my alumni."
absolutely, yeah, and it's one of those things, right? Like you said, like we saw people from FUV that we've known. Tony Reale was crowd surfing in the student section for Fordham. Another WFEV sports alum. I just want to shout out, by the way. And then there was one point during halftime where I got up. I was grabbing a drink or like a Pepsi or something on the concourse. And as I was weaving through the crowd, I was running into people I went to college with, people I was in WFUV with, all ready to root for Fordham and be a
You
part
got
of this
guys hanging out
moment.
on the suite level too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's one of those things. It's another great thing about this run that this culture that Coach Ergo has been able to cultivate in just 2 years at Fordham, right? Well, he's been at Fordham for 3 years, but 2 years as a head coach at Fordham. Where, I've always said, you can't spit in any direction in New York and not get it close to a Fordham alumni, right? People are here, they're ready. I think for a long time people didn't think that people were maybe there were a lot of not great seasons for the Rams in the 2010s and the 2000s. There were one or two decent seasons with Coach Neubauer, but then it kind of petered off there a little bit. And I think people just thought Fordham's a small school, they play in a mid-major conference, there just really isn't a chance with the way that college basketball is going. But I think last year and in the first year with Coach Neptune, they're building something that's kind of defying that. And I think that's been really great.
Yeah, it really is indeed. And well, getting back to what I was talking about as far as being able to like stay in two both conferences, it's kind of gonna be difficult. But you know what? It's not difficult. I mean, once you know how to balance out your schedule, when you get approved for when you get a chance to cover two different tournaments or three different tournaments, it's not that difficult. Once you know how to balance everything out, depending on how close these schools are to each other, like the time of the day, it all boils down to that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just one of those things where I just think it kind of reiterates, right, that New York is the epicenter of basketball, in my opinion. Look, I know, there are some really
There's some
strong
people going to be
arguments.
as Washington's the epicenter of basketball, Los Angeles the epicenter of basketball. I get why.
Yeah. And I'm not saying that those places are, they don't have basketball culture. They have fantastic, unique basketball culture. And then, I could also point to cities like or states like Indiana, or then you go to cities like Philly, they got the Big Five. I think what they're doing right now with the Big Five Classic, with getting all those teams in, a specific tournament, is really fantastic. It's something I think some of the I would hope the New York schools would try to emulate in the near future. But again, even if they don't do that, there's still a great culture. I think, when it was first announced that Coach Pitino was taking over St. John's, right? I think it unleashed a whole new wave of buzz for the St. John's program. They're playing a lot more games at the Garden than they've played the past couple of years. Coach Pitino was on the sideline a week or two ago with his white suit. There's a real renewal of New York college basketball culture. And then combine that with, the Knicks being really good right now, being a consistent playoff team. I think we're going to see a lot of great New York basketball at all levels.
Don't forget the New York Liberty in the WNBA Finals.
Oh, and of course the New York Liberty being in the WNBA. How could I forget the New York Liberty being in the WNBA Finals? It's again, like, it just adds to my point. We are seeing a real great decade, I think, of New York basketball.
Yeah, we really are. I mean, we could probably see, and I could probably see that. I mean, obviously, I know you got your Atlanta 10 tournament to cover. You're not going to be at the Garden at any point this week. Well,
I'll be keeping up though. I'll be watching. I'll be watching.
I mean, obviously, you're gonna catch the semifinals if you have time, because that day that's when the Atlanta 10's gonna have that day off, and then of course the championship game for the Biggies is literally after the semifinals for the Atlanta 10. So at least that's a balance right there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
yeah. You were gonna say something?
Oh yeah. No, I was just gonna say I think that's a great way. It was an interesting change, for the Atlantic 10 to kind of add that buffer day. But I think it's a really great decision in a lot of ways, and I hope they carry that forward. Wherever the tournament may move. I know it's going to be in DC next year. I don't know off the top of my head the schedule for the rest of the decade for the Atlantic 10 tournament, but that Friday day off is great for a lot of reasons. I mean, one, for people like us, it gives us a chance to get some one-on-one time with a lot of the coaches and the players that are going to be competing in the semifinals the next day. And from a fan's perspective, if you're just a New York basketball fan, right? Like I'm sure a lot of people who listen to this podcast are, it gives you time to maybe, go to the Big East tournament for that day. And most importantly, with a lot of the schools in the Atlantic 10 being based in, the DMV and St. Louis and Dayton, and now we've got Chicago, there are fans who, if they're a little bit hesitant about going, which I don't think anybody should be hesitant about going to the A10 tournament because it's always a great time. But, if you feel like your team's kind of, if you're not sure about how far your team's going to go, and you really want to, get that final push to, book the hotel, book the flight, grab the ticket, you have that extra day of travel to get to the Barclays Center to watch your team, possibly compete in the semifinals or the championship game. So it's a very unique move. But I think it's something that over the next couple of years, I'd be very interested to see how it plays out in terms of, managing player fatigue and ticket sales and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And we got to give a shout out to the women in media that are covering the Atlanta 10 tournament too. I mean, you had this girl Paige, the light skinned lady that was that was a student at Rhode Island a year ago.
Of course, yeah.
Stuff for the 10 tournament. And also Ali Melendez. We got to give a shout out to them. They do some great work in doing media for the Atlanta 10. And since it's International Women's Sports Day, which is International Women's Day rather, and Women History Month, we have to give our respects to these women. And both me and you getting to know Paige, she's done a phenomenal job as a current student at Rhode Island, being able to cover the Atlanta 10 tournament, the entire thing, not just her team.
Yeah, Paige has been great. I mean, I think she's got a really great partnership going on with the Atlantic 10. She's always at media days. I know there's a couple points, throughout the season where I've seen her, as well as Commissioner McGlade at Rose Hill Gym. And the coverage that she provides during the tournament has been fantastic. And I think that's just another one of those things, right? It's one of those things that mid-major basketball, especially Atlantic 10 basketball, provides. Whenever I'm at, an A10 media day or the A10 tournament, or even meeting just other beat reporters who are coming from, other parts of the country to come, cover their own teams at Rose Hill Gym when they're playing the Rams. Um, it's just you're meeting different people from all walks of life, all parts of the country. Um, and we don't, people don't care about, who you are, all that kind of stuff. It's just, we're just here for the love of basketball and just wanted to work together and put good content out. So yeah, I absolutely I agree with you 100%. It's always a great time, and I've met some of the coolest people I know covering A10 hoops.
Yeah, and so that, yeah, I mean, imagine if we was covering, imagine we was all covering A10. It was during back in the 2000s when Stephen Curry carried Davis into the Elite Eight, or when VCU upset Villanova, upset Duke. I almost said
Yeah.
Villanova, but
Well,
and then also Obi Toppin's time with Dayton.
yeah, Obi with Dayton was a good time. I I believe when Steph was at Davidson, that was when the Wildcats were still in the SoCon. Davidson is a pretty new addition to the Atlantic 10. I think they joined in 2014.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but again, even when you have alumni that were at these schools before they were in the Atlantic 10, it still gives these players, it helps serve as a base for, recruiting a lot of these players, right? I mean, Davidson, you go down to Davidson, right? I don't know if you've ever been to their gym. It's a fantastic gym, but it's pretty hard to look in any direction and not find, Steph Curry's 30 logo, right? So that all is there. I think that just, it's one of those things where I think it's to the credit of the Atlantic 10, right? In choosing how they find new teams to join the conference. Over the past couple of years, the A10 of 2000, right? The year 2000 is a very different A10 of the year 2024, but I think what we've seen is a lot of real high quality schools, a lot of good schools have left to go to other conferences, but at the same time, a lot of good schools have come in, right? I mean,
Exactly.
VCU, St. Louis, Loyola Chicago, right? I think one thing about Loyola Chicago coming in, obviously they're in the modern basketball conversation, their Final Four run from a couple years back, right, when they were still part of the Valley. Um, their
Yeah, and
first
all those
year,
game winners they had back then, man.
yeah,
Loyola Chicago has some. Loyola Chicago. I mean, when they moved into a different conference, it took a while for them to get adjusted to playing an entire A10 season as an A10 team. But seeing as they progress right now, they're a top four team in Atlantic 10. Like
top two. They're second place right now. They're
top two
14 and
actually.
3.
What makes them stay? Like what makes them a better Atlantic 10 team this year than they were last season when they were just coming in?
Yeah, so I think for anybody moving conferences is a huge adjustment, right? Loyola Chicago obviously was coming in, a frequent contender, in their previous conference. Obviously a Final Four team, um, but it's always going to be an adjustment coming into a conference, especially like the Atlantic 10, that a lot of people have talked about for years as a very unique style of play. Coach Drew Valentine, I remember in 2022 media day at the Barclays Center, which was the Ramblers' first media day as an A10 member. That was Coach Valentine's biggest focus, right? He's like, we have to learn how to play A10 basketball. Obviously, it was a challenge for them. They were a pretty low seed last year. They had a bit of a rough year, but they've rebounded. They've been a solid team. They're 22-8 overall, 14-3 in the conference. They beat Dayton on a Friday night matchup that was just a phenomenal performance. And I think it just shows, the resilience of this school and Coach Valentine's guys. And it also shows that the A10 is doing a great job in finding high quality teams to kind of expand their pool. Obviously, with UMass leaving to the MAC at the end of the 2024-25 school year, that's a big question that a lot of people had. But I think the recent addition of Loyola Chicago is proof that should they choose to go back to 15 once UMass, or even further once UMass leaves, I think they'll be in a pretty good spot. Because I think what a lot of people, really have to think about is when you're finding good teams, when you're looking for a team to expand your conference, it's not about, it's a very different philosophy than, an expansion team in professional sports. It's like the expansion team, the main focus is just getting in the market, right? It's getting the market, getting the arena, getting the fan base in there. and then you take the time. You're going to have some bad seasons unless you're like the Vegas Golden Knights in the NHL, but that's a rare example. But the focus is, building the fans, and then the wins will come. With a school like Loyola Chicago that's, been playing basketball for almost a century now, or over a century, the focus is, let's get this team in here. Let's get them to be a top contender early to expand our chance of getting more bids in the NCAA tournament and giving more teams from the Atlantic 10 to make big runs in March. So I think the groundwork they've laid is really important for the future of this conference. And I'm going to be very interested to see how they continue to respond with, the changes, the ever-changing college basketball landscape, right? Because it's been a crazy time all over the country, for college sports.
And you know what? Speaking of crazy time all over the country, we gotta transition to other topics because Caitlin Clark has been balling out during the 4 years of college, and she declared for the WNBA draft, which will be in Brooklyn Academy of Music, or to be more specific, Short BAM Theater, next door to the Barclays Center. Like, as you watch, and you ever had a chance to check out Caitlin Clark, she can shoot for the parking lot, right? Just like Sabrina Ionescu during Oregon days, but she's just built difference. Like, what are your overall thoughts on the development of Caitlin Clark's game up until being the highest scoring player in college basketball?
Oh man, I mean, like, where do I start, right? I mean, Caitlin Clark is one of those players where, if you're not following Big Ten hoops, or Iowa hoops, or even just college basketball in general, Caitlin Clark is one of those players that comes along every couple of years in any sport that it's like, if she's playing, you have to tune in, right? I mean, her skill set, her ability to, her scoring, the fact that, she's in games, right? She's trying to get to the scoring record, and she's chucking them up from the logo, and it's still like a solid shot, right? Um, she is just one of those players that is just, she's a spectacle, right? And I think it's really important for herself, for women's basketball, for college basketball in general, to have players like that come around every once in a while. So yeah, she's been a joy to watch. I'm very excited to see what she ends up doing at the now. I believe they just sold out all 1,000 tickets for fans
Yes,
at the,
they
at the
did. I was
WNBA
going to get
draft,
to
right?
that. It's going to be one of the most hyped WNBA drafts when you sell out over like 10,000 fans, like 1,000 fans. Let me correct myself. 1,000 in 15 minutes.
Yeah, it's unreal.
Glory.
And I think that just goes back to what I was saying, right? It's just, she is one of those players where you are going to want to follow every single step of her journey, because everything she does is going to be, transcendental. You look at, when she came to, schools like Rutgers this season, right? It felt like the whole crowd was there to watch Caitlin Clark. It reminds me of, yeah, it reminds me of, when the Warriors were, on that 73-9 run. You'd see them you'd watch them play a game at like the New Orleans Pelicans arena, right? And it'd be all Steph Curry jerseys. Like, people are coming just to watch Caitlin Clark. And I think it's been fantastic. But, like you've said, I think this 2024 WNBA draft class is also going to be really talented. There are still a couple names, I think, who, we're not sure, whether or not they might enter. But right now, even if this current class is kind of stuck to where they are right now, I think it's going to be really strong. It's going to be one of the best that we've potentially seen ever.
Yeah, exactly. And I know this is coming from us A10 guys, but we got to call it as it is. If Caitlin Clark, Iowa, was played in the Atlantic 10 conference this season, she would literally smoke everybody. Would you agree?
I mean, Caitlin Clark's smoking everybody wherever she goes, right? It's not really a question of where could she succeed. It's more of a question of where couldn't she succeed, right? So yeah, I mean, look, I'm not here to knock the A10 or any other conference, but it's just one of those things where there's nothing you can really argue against, right? I think you just have to sit back and enjoy, what we're seeing right now.
Yeah, you got to sit back and enjoy that, and you also got to sit back and enjoy Abby Shu in Columbia University. I mean, Columbia University, they coming up. They may not win a tournament game, but they coming up. Like, if you ever had a chance to see Columbia women's basketball, or at least their news or at least their news publications that local TVs are going all the way to Columbia to interview these players and cover their stories, like what went through your mind?
I'm sorry, what did you say?
Like, if you ever had a chance to observe Columbia women's basketball and see how they grown a lot from defeating the Fordham Rams women's basketball team last year to what they are right now, with Abby Shu scoring the most points in Columbia women's basketball history. Thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's fantastic. I think Ivy League hoops is on both the men's and women's side is having a bit of a moment right now. I think it's one of those things where, there's been this, there's always kind of been this juggle where it's like, do I want to, you know, am I limited? Obviously, the Ivy Leagues are great schools. I mean, that's why they're the Ivy League, right? But in basketball terms, it's like, how do I make a name for myself while still staying at this Ivy League? And I think players like Abby Sue have kind of transcended that. Obviously, you know, the Lions this year 21-5, 12-1 in conference play. It's been fantastic to watch. And look, they get wins against Prof. They get wins against Seton Hall. These are it's one of those things, again, like we were talking about with, you know it's propping up Ivy League women's basketball. It's propping up a return to form for high quality college hoops in the city of New York, right? Um it's all about being part of these things that are bigger than yourself. And I think the Columbia Lions are a huge player in that.
Yeah, they really are. They literally stepped the game up, and their fan base is really stepped up big time. But right now, I mean, funny enough, if I wasn't covering the Big East tournament, if I wasn't covering the Big East semifinals, I probably would have got to sneak in at least a few games. But it all depends on the seeding, because you have to be the top four in that conference in order to make it to the tournament itself.
Yes.
So the Ivy League is kind of a lot tougher to get into the NCAA tournament in that conference than it is in like the Power Five conferences, or conferences that has any larger than like 10 teams.
Yes, absolutely. I think one thing we talk about a lot on the A10 Talk podcast is, as great as it has been, that women's basketball and women's college basketball has more eyes on it than ever. There is still, and in some ways this is fair, and then in some ways it's a little bit tough, where there is not as much eyes on women's mid-major basketball as there is on, the Stanfords of the world, the UConns, the South Carolinas, right? And then in return, right, the Pac-12s, the Big Easts, the SECs. So it's tough for a lot of these mid-major schools and these mid-major conferences to get multiple bids in the NCAA women's tournament. So like you said, right, the Ivy League this year, I mean, the Ivy League in most years on both sides, is a one bid league. You got right now Columbia, Princeton. They're pretty much a lock for the Ivy League tournament. I believe they've already clinched it. They're playing for that one spot. So yeah, if you want some high quality, high stakes college basketball, Ivy League tournament is where you want to be.
Yeah, and to correct you on something, Princeton, Columbia, they're tied at 12 wins and 1 losses, but
Yes.
Princeton has a better overall record than them. So Columbia would have to win the final game, and Princeton will have to lose at home against Penn in order for Columbia to get that #1 spot. If that
Yes.
happens, you might see me in the Ivy League tournament there too.
Yeah, regardless, they've clinched the
I mean, the
tournament.
game
Yeah.
starts at 4:30, which is like a 1 and 4 seed matchup will start at 4:30, which means it ends at 6:30, and it'll only take you like 30 minutes to get from Columbia to the Garden. So yeah, it shouldn't be that hard.
Hey man, if the mad dash is worth it, right?
Yeah, if it's worth it. Now we transition into a team that, when I went to Fordham University and working the Gately show, the Fordham Rams did make it to the NCAA tournament and lost to Syracuse, and they had a 10-8. They had an 8-10 record, barely losing their first tournament game. against Loyola Chicago. Ouch. So, observing the women's basketball team at Fordham University, like what went through your mind as far as why do they have these below average struggles and why they're not the same as they were for like in recent years?
Yeah, I think the big thing, right, is like with the men's team, with Coach Ergo in his second year, you've got Coach Mitchell in her first year with the Rams. So I think when you have any team with a first year head coach, no matter what Fordham's done in the past, I was also there for some of those really good years under Coach Gately. Um, you can't bank on that, right? Because Coach Gately's not there. Um, I think this has been a transition year, but it's also been a year with a lot of highs for Fordham, especially looking at this 6-game win streak that they had going into the Atlantic 10 tournament. Well, not going into the Atlantic 10 tournament, but winning 6 of their last 8. Sorry,
Before
excuse
losing
me,
to Lysala. Well, actually,
6 of their last 7 regular season games.
one
Excuse
of the
me.
losses came in a forfeit against Davidson on the road. I don't know how that happened, but
That's true. You got me there because Davidson did have some injury struggles heading into the end of the season. It caused them to forfeit several games, and they actually ended up backing out of the Atlantic 10 women's tournament. Very unfortunate. Um, Very unfortunate, situation for Davidson, but wishing the best for them. But look, I think, getting back to Fordham, I think the benefit of being in a transition year, right, for Fordham, being in with a first year head coach is, um, I wouldn't really say expectations are low, expectations are high, but I think people are really just trying to figure you out. Analysts are trying to figure you out. You're trying to figure yourself out. And I think they figured a lot of things out for themselves, and I think they've set themselves up to be, again, kind of moving back up into into prominence in the Atlantic 10. So, you know, it's unfortunate that they lost to Loyola Chicago,
just
but I think there's a bright future for this program.
yeah, it really is. I mean, there's bright future for both programs. I mean, you can't. I mean, you never know what type of team you're going to get in college basketball every year. I mean, you're going to have some good seasons. Some seasons you're not going to be good, and it's just tough. It's tough to deal with because prior to having that long winning streak, and it's strong with the only exception that losing that final game against losing that final home game, they had their share of blowout losses where they weren't so competitive. So but then again, it's all about rebuilding and figuring out the type of team you are season in and season out.
Yeah, and again, look, Fordham finished with they finished 12-17, right? Um, but like I said, at the end of the day, with college basketball, the beauty of college basketball, in my opinion, is that you know they went into the Atlantic 10 tournament 12-16, right? Um, that's a pretty tough spot. They're kind of back in the rankings. They have a lot more games to play than some of the higher seeds. But no matter what your record, you can go into your conference tournament, unless you're in like the Ivy League. But in these all-inclusive conference tournaments, like the Atlantic 10 is, you can go in without a single win on your record, and you can still have a chance to, punch a ticket to the NCAA tournament. So I think with a team like Fordham, the focus is not, right now, this was not this season, finishing with a better record than last year, or it wasn't, finding your way, into the top 25. It was really just about playing every game ahead of you. And I think they did that with poise. I think this was, a solid start to the Mitchell, tenure at Fordham.
Yeah, everything will get figured out. Well,
Exactly.
that wrap up this episode. Nothing but that sports talk. Thank you for stopping by, Samuel Basel, and I can't wait to see what the Atlantic 10 tournament. And you can catch him. You can catch the work he does for A10 Talk. You can catch me do the videographic interview of the players post game, and we might even get to do a stand up together after every freaking game. Except for Tuesday, except for Thursday and Friday because Thursday those games will be those days I'll be in the Big East tournament. possibly Ivy League, but definitely the Big East tournament. And of course, well, even though the semifinals will be in the afternoon, it probably would have been difficult traveling back and forth. But you never know.
Never know. Yeah, thank you again for having me, man. This has been great. Can't wait to see you next week in Brooklyn. And I hope as much as I want to spend as much time with you at the Atlantic 10 tournament, I hope you can get, you can make those crazy journeys from Brooklyn to the
Hey,
Garden to,
hey, we media people, we do anything to get March Madness content wherever we go.
yeah.
If we was working for Fox or CBS, it would have been a totally different story.
Yeah, no Ubers for us. No Escalades for us going from game to game. We're hopping on the 456 train, right? But yeah, in the meantime, if you want to check me out, I'm on Twitter at SamJuan2878, SAMJUAN2878. I'm also on house-enterprise.com and A10Talk.com, where I'm primarily talking about the Fordham Rams. So thank you again, Rafiq.
Exactly. For Samuel Basel, Rafiq was on. We'll see you next time.